It started on a Saturday night, which felt unfair in a way only weekends can. Weekends are supposed to be neutral territory. Laundry half-folded, wine poured a little too generously, nothing urgent enough to ruin your life before Monday. David was asleep beside me. Not the romantic kind of asleep, more like the defeated, mouth slightly open, snoring through his own excuses kind. 58 years of marriage had taught me the difference. His phone lit up on the nightstand. I noticed it because everything was quiet. No emails, no sirens outside, no inner monologue screaming for once. Just the soft glow of a screen lighting up a man who had spent the last decade telling me he was too tired for drama. The message preview was short, casual, intimate in the laziest way. "Are you alone?" I stared at it longer than I should have, long enough for my brain to offer reasonable explanations. Work emergency, group chat mistake, a coworker with boundary issues and poor timing. I didn't wake him. That surprised me. 10 years ago, I would have shaken him awake like a fire alarm. 5 years ago, I would have turned away and pretended I hadn't seen it. That night, I just picked up the phone. It felt heavier than it should have. Or maybe that was just 40 years of marriage condensed into one object small enough to fit in my palm. I unlocked it. Of course I knew the passcode. He never changed it. Men who think they're clever rarely do. I opened the message thread. Claire, coworker, mid to late 30s if I had to guess. The kind of name that always sounds like it belongs to someone who owns neutral-tone blazers and believes she's different from other women. I reread the message. "Are you alone?" I looked at David, still asleep, safe, unaware. A man resting comfortably inside a life he had quietly rearranged without my consent. My thumbs hovered over the screen. Here's the part where people expect rage, or heartbreak, or at least a trembling hand. Instead, what I felt was something closer to clarity, the kind that arrives late, unapologetic, and doesn't ask permission. I typed back, "The door's unlocked." Then I placed the phone exactly where it had been and lay back down. My heart didn't race, my hands didn't shake, I didn't cry. I stared at the ceiling, noticing a crack we'd been meaning to fix for years. Funny how some things get ignored simply because they're always there. David shifted in his sleep and mumbled something. My name, maybe. Or maybe it was hers. At that point, the distinction felt irrelevant. I thought about all the Saturdays I'd made dinner plans around his schedule, all the weekends I'd defended his exhaustion to friends, all the times I'd been told gently that I was overthinking. Apparently I wasn't thinking enough. The phone stayed silent after that. No follow-up, no correction, no sorry, wrong person. Just silence, the kind that doesn't deny anything. I smiled, just slightly. Not because I'd won anything, but because for the first time in a long while, I hadn't played the role expected of me. And that, I would soon realize, was the most dangerous thing I could have done. Sunday morning arrived with the confidence of a man who believes nothing has changed. David moved through the kitchen like a routine he didn't have to think about. Grinding beans, pouring water, sighing at the news on his phone. He sighed at the right moments, too. 58 years on this planet, and he still thought timing passed for depth. I watched him from the table, not with suspicion, but with the mild curiosity of someone realizing she's been watching the wrong show for decades. It's unsettling. The moment you understand you've memorized the dialogue of a genre that never intended you to be the lead. "Did you sleep okay?" he asked, gentle enough to check the box. "Great," I said, which surprised me by being true. I had slept like a woman who had finally put something down, maybe not anger, maybe not love, but a certain obligation to react the way I was expected to. He nodded, satisfied. David preferred short answers. They didn't ask for follow-ups. As he talked about the week ahead, my mind drifted backward, not in a dramatic montage, but in a neat filing system. I remembered dinner parties where I was introduced as David's wife, as if that were a job title with a pension plan. I remembered his mother asking him first, always him, if he was tired, if he was eating enough, if work was stressful, then turning to me like an afterthought she didn't want to forget twice. I remembered arguments that ended before they began. "You're imagining things. You're too sensitive. Why are you making this bigger than it is?" At the time, I didn't know the word for it. Gaslighting came later, after I had already learned to dim the lights on myself. There was a long stretch where I practiced becoming easier. I spoke less. I laughed sooner. I edited my thoughts down to something pleasant and harmless, like furniture you don't bump into. I told myself this was maturity. This was marriage. This was love without the drama. If life were a movie, I would have been the extra behind a potted plant, visible enough to fill the frame, invisible enough to ignore. No lines, no close-ups, just continuity. David set his mug down and mentioned work again. A name passed casually between us, light as a breeze through curtains. Claire's project is finally moving, he said, not looking at me. I nodded on cue. Years of rehearsal had given me perfect timing. Inside, I took a note, not with anger, not with jealousy. Just data. I had learned finally the difference between emotion and information. When he left the apartment, the quiet returned. I cleaned slowly, wiping counters already clean, straightening magazines that hadn't moved. It's what people do when the truth is waiting patiently in the corner, arms crossed. Eventually I sat on the couch and laughed, softly, alone. Not because it hurt, but because something clicked. I hadn't disappeared. I had been placed in the background, and I had agreed to stay there. My phone buzzed, not David, not Claire. An old automated reminder surfaced from my inbox, attached to a legal thread I hadn't opened in years. One name sat there, calm and unassuming, like a door you didn't realize was still unlocked. Ethan Whitman. I stared at the screen, feeling that familiar tightening in my chest, the kind that doesn't signal fear but movement. Something was beginning. And for once, I wasn't late to my own life. I met Claire on Wednesday, which felt almost considerate of the universe. It gave me 2 full days to practice my neutral face and remind myself that women like her are rarely villains in their own stories. They're usually just understudies who believe the lead role will eventually be handed to them if they wait quietly enough. The meeting happened in a cafe near David's office. Glass walls, polite lighting, the kind of place where everyone pretends they're not eavesdropping. I was there early, nursing a coffee I didn't want. When Claire walked in, I recognized her immediately. Not because she was beautiful, she was, in a symmetrical, unthreatening way, but because she was wearing the blazer. Navy. Structured. Expensive enough to signal intention, neutral enough to deny it. I had seen it draped over the passenger seat of David's car weeks earlier. He had said it belonged to a coworker he was giving a ride home. I had believed him. I had also believed in weather forecasts that promised sun. She smiled when she saw me, a professional smile, the kind that says I've heard so much about you without specifying what. Margaret? She asked. Maggie, I said, standing. We shook hands. Her grip was confident, calibrated. She had practiced this too. We sat. She ordered tea, chamomile. Of course. I hope it's okay I reached out, she said. David mentioned you were interested in some freelance work. Interesting. He had mentioned me. As a concept. Of course, I replied. I'm always interested in new conversations. She laughed lightly, relieved. Claire seemed to mistake my calm for approval, which was generous of her. She talked about the office, about long hours, about how demanding David's role was. She spoke his name the way people speak about weather, constant, unavoidable, something you plan around. At one point, she leaned forward, earnest. He's lucky to have such a supportive partner. There it was, the compliment that doubles as a cage. Support is my specialty, I said, smiling. I've had decades of practice. She didn't catch it. Most people don't hear the knife when it's wrapped in velvet. As she stood to leave, the blazer shifted, revealing a small tear near the cuff, something I had stitched weeks earlier, absent-mindedly while waiting for David to come home. My work. My thread. Claire noticed my glance and followed it down. Oh, she said, laughing softly. This old thing? It's practically falling apart. Things often do, I said, quietly. Outside, she waved goodbye, confident the meeting had gone well. I watched her walk away, heels clicking with purpose, carrying a certainty that didn't belong to her. Back home, I stood in the entryway, staring at my reflection in the mirror. I looked exactly like the woman everyone thought I was, composed, reasonable, invisible. But something had shifted. Seeing Claire hadn't ignited rage, it had clarified geometry. Angles, distances, who stood where on the stage. That night, David mentioned her again, casually, carelessly. I listened. I nodded. And for the first time, I began to design the room where the truth would eventually have to stand. Ethan Whitman answered my email in under an hour, which told me 2 things immediately. He still checked his inbox too often, and my name had landed somewhere familiar. Some relationships don't end, they just change their filing system. We agreed to meet on Thursday afternoon at a quiet wine bar in Soho, the kind of place that believes in low voices and expensive restraint. When I arrived, Ethan was already there, seated at the bar with a glass of red he hadn't touched. He stood when he saw me. Old habits, or old respect. I couldn't tell which one I appreciated more. "Maggie," he said, smiling gently, "you look well." I almost laughed. Well is what people say when they don't know which version of you they're allowed to acknowledge. "So do you," I said, and meant it. He looked like a man who had survived something private and come out thinner, sharper, less interested in pretending. We ordered another glass and sat in a corner booth. For a moment we talked about safe things. Weather, mutual acquaintances, the way New York seems determined to outlast everyone. Then he tilted his head slightly and said, "So, Claire?" I didn't flinch. That felt like progress. "You already know," I said. He nodded. "I knew before I wanted to. I just didn't know who else was involved." There it was. The missing piece clicking into place, not loudly but decisively. Ethan spoke without bitterness, which somehow made it worse. He told me about the late nights, the sudden need for privacy, the quiet erosion that happens when someone rewrites history while you're still living in it. "She said I was imagining things," he added, almost amused. Apparently that's her favorite line. I smiled thinly. She has a type. We drank. The wine was good. Bold, unapologetic, the opposite of how I had lived for years. "I'm not here to compare wounds," I said. "I just wanted clarity." Ethan studied me for a moment. "And what will you do once you have it?" The question landed with weight. I thought of David asleep beside me, of Claire's blazer, of the years I had spent editing myself into something palatable. "I'm done being quiet," I said, "but I'm not interested in chaos." Ethan nodded. "Neither am I. Chaos is inefficient." That made me laugh. It surprised both of us. He leaned back, considering. "There's a fundraiser next month. Media people, donors, board members. Claire will be there, David too." Of course they would be. People like them prefer rooms with witnesses. "I was already invited," I said, as David's wife. Ethan's smile sharpened. "Then you have the best seat in the house." We didn't call it a plan. We didn't need to. It existed in the space between us, fully formed, patient, not revenge, correction. When we stood to leave, Ethan paused. "One thing," he said. "If this gets uncomfortable—" "It will," I replied. He smiled. "Good. That means it's working." Walking back onto the street, the city felt different. Louder, brighter, less apologetic. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't reacting to someone else's decisions. I was choosing the lighting. For the next 3 weeks, I became the version of myself David trusted most. Not the passionate one, not the curious one, the calm one, the agreeable one. The woman who had learned, through years of subtle correction, that peace was rewarded and questions were not. I laughed a little more at dinner. I asked about his day and didn't interrupt. I touched his arm when he spoke, just enough to reassure him that whatever he was doing, wherever his attention had been drifting, was invisible to me. Men like David don't crave secrecy as much as they crave permission. I gave him plenty. He grew lighter, less careful. He left his phone face up. He hummed while getting dressed. Once he even told me I seemed more relaxed lately, as if this were a compliment and not an admission. "You seem happy," he said one evening, loosening his tie. "I am," I replied. And again, it wasn't a lie. I had stopped trying to win a role that was never written for me. Behind the scenes, I became methodical. I didn't snoop recklessly. I didn't read messages that weren't meant to be read. I simply paid attention to patterns, calendar invites that didn't align, late meetings that required fresh cologne, the way Claire's name appeared more often in sentences that didn't need her. Information, not obsession. There's a difference. I met Ethan twice more. Always briefly. Always in public. We spoke like professionals managing a shared project, not wounded spouses licking old cuts. He handled logistics. I handled timing. Neither of us raised our voices. That part mattered. At home, I practiced restraint. When David canceled plans, I smiled. When he arrived late, I shrugged. When he forgot something important to me, I reminded myself that forgetting is easier when you've already decided something doesn't matter. One night, he came home energized in a way that felt almost youthful. He kissed my cheek, poured himself a drink, and told me about the fundraiser again, the one he'd already mentioned twice. Claire's been coordinating most of it, he said. She's very capable. I'm sure, I replied, reaching for my book. He paused, watching me. You don't mind coming, do you? I know these things aren't really your scene. There it was, the quiet test. Was I still small enough? Still pliable? Not at all, I said. I'd love to support you. He smiled, relieved. He thought he had won something. Men often confuse silence with surrender. Later that night, alone in the bathroom, I studied my reflection. Same face, same lines, same woman everyone underestimated. But my eyes looked different. Sharper, awake. I wasn't pretending to be fine. I was preparing. The invitation arrived the next morning, formal, polite. My name included, correctly spelled. I added it to my calendar and closed the laptop gently, like someone handling a loaded object with care. Some victories only exist because someone else doesn't realize the game has changed. I let David believe he was winning. It made what came next inevitable. The fundraiser was scheduled for a Friday evening, which felt intentional in a way I couldn't prove. Fridays encourage performance. People arrive already rehearsed, carrying their best versions like accessories they're willing to set down later. The invitation lived on our kitchen counter for a full week. Thick paper, understated font, the kind of envelope that signals importance without begging for it. David walked past it every morning like it was furniture. Present, useful, unexamined. Black tie optional, he said once, skimming it. You don't have to dress up if you don't want to. Translation, don't draw attention. Don't surprise anyone. I'll figure something out, I said, folding it back into place. I did figure something out, not immediately. Slowly. I tried on dresses I hadn't worn in years, stood under different lights, paid attention to how fabric moved when I walked. I wasn't looking for dramatic. I was looking for precise. Something that didn't announce itself until it needed to. Ethan and I spoke the night before. Briefly, efficiently. Nothing changes unless they make it change, he said. I know, I replied. They always do. The day of the event arrived with unnatural calm. David was distracted, checking his phone, rehearsing names. He didn't notice when I laid my outfit out on the bed, didn't comment when I dressed with care instead of haste. You look nice, he said eventually. Pleasant, vague. So do you, I replied. Accurate, incomplete. The venue was a renovated gallery downtown. White walls, high ceilings, the illusion of honesty. People clustered in small, strategic groups, holding drinks they didn't finish, laughing half a second too late. I recognized the choreography. I had lived adjacent to it for decades. Claire was already there when we arrived. Of course she was. She wore confidence like a credential, moving easily from group to group, her blazer replaced by something softer, more inviting. When she saw David, her face lit up in a way that was just plausible enough to excuse. She glanced at me, smiled, recovered quickly. Professional, controlled. Maggie, she said, you made it. I did, I replied. I always do. David excused himself almost immediately, pulled away by donors and obligations. I watched him go without resentment. Distance, I had learned, can be useful. Ethan arrived 20 minutes later. Alone, calm. He caught my eye across the room and nodded once. Not a greeting, a confirmation. As the evening unfolded, I felt the risk settle in. Not fear, exposure. Plans don't fail because they're cruel. They fail because people panic. I stayed still, I listened, I waited. When the organizer tapped the microphone for attention, the room shifted. Glasses lowered, conversations paused mid-sentence. This was the moment people love most, the sanctioned silence. Introductions began, names, titles, contributions, applause at predictable intervals. I felt David relax beside me, secure in the script. When my name was mentioned briefly, politely, as an extension of his, I smiled. Not for the crowd, for myself, because I knew what was coming, and so did Ethan. All it would take now was one small adjustment. And rooms like this are never prepared for that. The microphone feedback settled into a hush that felt almost ceremonial. People leaned forward slightly, the way they do when they expect to be affirmed. No one ever expects to be corrected. The host thanked sponsors, praised commitment, celebrated partnerships. Words floated up and dissolved. I listened the way you listen to a weather report when you already know it's going to rain. David stood close to me, one hand resting at my back. Possessive. Reassured. A man convinced the architecture would hold. Then the host invited a brief acknowledgement of the team that had made the event possible. Claire's name came up, followed by applause that felt rehearsed even to her. She stepped forward, gracious, practiced, eyes scanning the room for the people who mattered. When the clapping softened, I lifted my glass. Not high, not dramatically, just enough to be seen. "I hope you don't mind," I said, my voice carrying more easily than I expected. Calm has a way of traveling. Since we're recognizing collaboration tonight, I wanted to thank Claire as well, personally. The room tilted, not visibly, internally, heads turned with polite curiosity. David's hand tightened, then loosened, as if he were recalibrating his grip on the evening. Claire smiled, a fraction too late. "Of course," she said. "That's very kind." "It is," I agreed. "Especially given how many late meetings she's coordinated. The calendar invites alone must have taken hours." A few people laughed, assuming humor. That was my gift to them. I wasn't here to embarrass anyone who didn't deserve it. David cleared his throat. "Maggie." "I'm almost done," I said gently. I didn't look at him. I looked at Claire. "I just wanted to say how impressed I am by your commitment, even when it meant being available on weekends, nights, times when you thought someone was alone." Silence landed, clean and unmistakable. Someone coughed. A glass touched a table too loudly. The air changed temperature. Claire's smile held, but her eyes did not. They searched. David, the host, the exits. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Words are difficult when they've already been used against you. "I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding," David said quickly, stepping forward, the reflex of a man accustomed to smoothing edges. "This isn't the place." "It's exactly the place," Ethan said, from somewhere to my left. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Recognition moved through the room in a quiet wave. People remember lawyers. They remember ex-husbands. They remember context. "I'm Ethan Whitman," he continued. "Claire and I were married, until these meetings started overlapping with our marriage. No gasps, no shouting, just the collective realization that no one was reaching for their drink anymore." I took a sip. The wine tasted excellent. David turned to me, disbelief flickering into something else. Fear, maybe. "Why would you do this?" he asked, low and urgent. "We could have talked." "We did talk," I said. "You just spoke. I listened." Claire finally stepped back, color rising, then draining. The host hovered, helpless, unsure which version of professionalism applied. I placed my glass down. "Thank you for your generosity tonight," I said to the room. "I think that's all." I didn't wait for permission to leave. As I walked away, the silence followed, not awkward, not loud, intentional. "Some scenes don't require drama. They just require truth," said once, "where it can't be taken back." David followed me into the corridor outside the gallery, his footsteps too quick, his breath already rehearsing explanations. The door closed behind us, muting the event into a distant murmur. It felt symbolic in a way I didn't comment on. "What was that?" he demanded, his voice low but frantic. "You blindsided me." I stopped walking. Slowly. I turned to face him, noticing how unfamiliar he looked without an audience to perform for. "No," I said. "I stopped covering for you." He laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "You embarrassed me. You embarrassed us." "There is no us in what you did," I replied. My voice surprised even me. Steady, almost kind. That was the problem. He tried a different angle, softer this time. "You misunderstood things. Claire and I, we're colleagues. You've always been sensitive about my work." There it was, the old language, reliable, comfortable. He waited for it to land to make me doubt my footing. I didn't move. "You told me I imagined things," I said. "For years. Tonight, you imagined you were still in control." He stared at me, recalculating. I could see it. The moment he realized the tools weren't working anymore. No raised voice, no tears, no bargaining. Inside the gallery, applause broke out for something unrelated. Life, undisturbed. "This didn't have to happen like this," he said quietly. "It did," I answered, "because it's the only way you'd stop rewriting it." Claire emerged briefly from the doorway, eyes red, phone in hand. She didn't look at either of us. She walked past, heels unsteady, certainty gone. For the first time, she looked her age and then some. David watched her leave, something collapsing behind his eyes. "I'll call you," he said. Not a promise, a reflex. "Don't," I replied. He hesitated, waiting for the version of me who always softened endings. She didn't show up. I walked out into the night alone. The city met me without judgment. Traffic, voices, light spilling onto sidewalks. I breathed in deeply, as if my lungs had been waiting for permission. Ethan stood across the street, hands in his pockets. He nodded once when he saw me. "You okay?" he asked. "I am," I said. And this time it wasn't a provisional answer. We didn't linger. There was nothing left to manage. As I headed home, my phone buzzed. Messages stacking up, names flashing, concern disguised as curiosity. I didn't open any of them. For years, David had told me what was real, what mattered, what I was allowed to feel. Tonight, the gaslight didn't flicker. It went out. And in the dark that followed, I could finally see myself clearly, unapologetic, unedited, and no longer waiting to be believed. The morning after felt suspiciously ordinary. Sunlight through the kitchen window, coffee brewing, the world continuing as if nothing had cracked open the night before. That's how consequences usually arrive, not with drama, but with paperwork. David didn't come home. He texted once, sometime around dawn. "We need to talk." I left it unread. Not out of cruelty, out of clarity. I had learned that urgency is often a costume worn by people who are late to accountability. By noon, the calls started. Friends who had been meaning to check in. Colleagues who wanted to make sure I was okay. The word traveled fast, edited in transit, sharpened by whispers. I let it. Stories find their own shape when you stop correcting them. David returned 2 days later to collect clothes. He moved through the apartment like a guest unsure of the rules. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "My lawyer says we should keep this civil," he said, stacking shirts that no longer felt like his. "I agree," I replied. "Civility saves time." That surprised him. He had expected anger, tears, negotiation. Without those, he looked unmoored. The divorce unfolded quietly, which is to say, expensively. But David's need to control the narrative worked against him. Documents don't respond to charm. Timelines don't bend to tone. The late nights, the calendar overlaps, the misunderstandings, they added up with unromantic precision. Claire resigned before she was asked to. Her name disappeared from newsletters, from committees, from rooms that prefer clean exits over honest explanations. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. Consequences don't require witnesses. Ethan checked in once, then stepped back. We had served our purpose to each other. There was respect in knowing when to exit a shared story. The settlement favored me. Not because I demanded revenge, but because I finally stopped conceding. Years of being agreeable had trained David to assume I would keep doing it. He had mistaken my patience for permanence. When the papers were signed, I walked home alone. I noticed details I hadn't in years. The way the city breathes between blocks, the sound of my own footsteps keeping time. That night, I opened my laptop and started writing. Not emails, not explanations, just sentences, observations. The truth, stripped of decoration. I didn't know what it would become. I just knew it was mine. People still ask what happened, as if the answer might change depending on who hears it. I keep it simple. He forgot I was paying attention, I say. Some smile, some look uncomfortable. Both reactions tell me enough. I sleep better now. Not because I'm alone, but because nothing in my life requires translation anymore. No footnotes, no apologies. The damage didn't disappear. It settled. And from that settlement, something solid formed. Not bitterness. Not triumph. Just ownership. A year later, I still live in the same apartment, which surprises people. They expect reinvention to come with relocation, as if freedom requires a new zip code. I kept the place because it's quiet now. Because it's mine. Because nothing echoes here anymore unless I invite it to. The crack in the ceiling is still there. I never fixed it. I like knowing where the fault lines are. My mornings are slower. I drink coffee by the window, not checking anyone else's schedule, not adjusting my thoughts mid-sip. I write most days, not for an audience, at least not yet, but for the relief of not having to compress myself into something palatable. Words I've learned are obedient when you stop lying to them. People ask if I miss being married. They phrase it gently, like concern. I tell them I miss who I thought I had to be less than I enjoy who I am now. That usually ends the conversation. David tried to call once, months after the divorce finalized. I watched the phone ring until it stopped, not because I was afraid of hearing his voice, but because I didn't need to remember how it used to sound when it was explaining something away. Claire moved to another city. I heard that secondhand, through a friend who wanted to see my reaction. I had none. Distance, I've discovered, is a solution often mistaken for forgiveness. Ethan sends a postcard every Christmas. No notes, just cities. It feels appropriate, proof of life without obligation. Sometimes late at night, I think about that first message. Are you alone? The question itself feels almost quaint now, like something from a language I no longer speak. I wasn't alone then. I just wasn't being seen. There's a difference. Last weekend I hosted a small dinner. Friends, laughter, a bottle of wine that didn't need saving for a special occasion. At one point, someone asked how I learned to be so calm about everything. I considered the question seriously before answering. I stopped arguing with people who benefit from my silence, I said. They laughed, unsure if I was joking. I let them decide. When the night ended and the apartment emptied, I stood by the door for a moment longer than necessary. Old habit. Then I locked it. Not out of fear, not out of habit, but out of choice. Some doors don't need to be slammed. They just need to be closed deliberately, with your hand steady on the handle. I turned off the lights and went to bed, carrying nothing with me that didn't belong there. Not regret, not rage, not permission. Just myself, fully accounted for. And for the first time in my life, that was more than enough. People assume healing is loud, that it announces itself with declarations and dramatic exits. Mine didn't. It arrived quietly, like a habit I didn't realize I'd broken. It showed up in small ways, in how I no longer flinch when my phone lights up, in how silence feels spacious instead of accusatory, in how my laughter comes faster now without checking whether it's appropriate. I didn't become fearless. I became honest. There's a difference. Some mornings I still wake up early out of reflex, my body prepared to manage someone else's day. When that happens, I sit still until the feeling passes. I remind myself there's nothing I need to fix before breakfast. The story people like best is the revenge. The moment. The room going quiet. I understand why. It's neat, contained. But that wasn't the ending. It was the interruption. The real ending came later, when I realized I no longer rehearsed conversations that weren't happening. When my thoughts stopped circling old arguments like unresolved chords, when peace stopped feeling unfamiliar. I didn't win anything. I reclaimed it. There are still days that ache a little. Long marriages leave grooves, but they no longer dictate direction. Memory, I've learned, doesn't have to be a trap. It can be a reference point, a reminder of how far you've moved. If someone watching this is wondering when they'll feel whole again, I won't tell you it happens all at once. It doesn't. It happens when you stop waiting to be understood, when you stop asking permission to trust yourself, when you realize your life doesn't need witnesses to be valid. That's when the warmth settles in. Not like a spotlight, like a steady light you carry with you, quiet, sufficient, and finally yours.